Hi, I'm Oscar. I want to share the story of how I found out that my wife was cheating on me, and not just with anyone. I hope you'll find this as jaw-dropping as I did when I first uncovered the truth. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a security guard at the airport in Denver. It's not the most demanding job, but it pays the bills, and I've gotten used to the routine. My wife, Amelia, is 34 and works as a nurse at a nearby hospital. We've been married for 5 years now, but we met 6 years ago under some pretty unusual circumstances. Before I met Amelia, I used to box. Boxing was my life until I started losing. A string of failures in the ring left me feeling like I had nothing left. 3 years of constant losses crushed me, and I spiraled into depression. I started drinking heavily, to the point where I was spending most evenings in bars, drowning my frustration in alcohol. One night, it got so bad that I almost didn't make it. After a binge that should have ended in a typical hangover, I ended up in the ICU instead. That's where I met her, Amelia. She was the nurse who took care of me, and I remember how she stood by my side during those terrifying days when it felt like my life was hanging by a thread. When I finally woke up from the coma, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I'd never had much luck with women. Boxing had always been my focus, but Amelia was different. She took care of me like no one ever had before. We started dating not long after I got out of the hospital. We had 2 incredible years together. We traveled to Paris, Berlin, and parts of Asia, living out adventures we couldn't believe we were able to afford. Things seemed perfect. After 3 years of dating, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. But looking back now, I realized the cracks had already started to show long before I ever noticed. I didn't notice it at first. You never do when you're caught up in the day-to-day, right? But over the past few months, Amelia started working late. I didn't think much of it. She's a nurse, after all, and nurses deal with emergencies, long shifts, and tough patients all the time. I trusted her completely. Why wouldn't I? She'd been my rock, the one who pulled me out of the darkest period of my life. So, when she'd come home late, exhausted, I'd give her space, tell her to relax, and try to make things easier for her. But then there was that one night. It was a warm summer evening, and Amelia came home later than usual. But what really stood out wasn't the time, it was her state. She was drunk. I had never seen her like that before. She was stumbling, giggling to herself in a way that felt completely off. Amelia never drank much, let alone came home wasted. My gut told me something was wrong, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe she had a tough day and went out with some colleagues to blow off steam. But then, as she collapsed into bed without even saying much, something gnawed at me. It was out of character for her. She hadn't mentioned anything about going out, and when I tried to ask, she just waved me off, mumbling about being tired. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced, replaying everything in my head, trying to make sense of it. Then came the moment that changed everything. For reasons I can't explain, maybe it was paranoia, maybe just curiosity, I checked her bag. I'd never done anything like that before. We had always trusted each other. But this time, something just didn't sit right with me. And there, inside her bag, was a set of lingerie I had never seen before. Why would she need that at work? I couldn't come up with a single good reason. That night, after finding the lingerie, I didn't sleep at all. My mind was a mess. I lay there next to Amelia, who was sleeping off her drunken night, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was a gift for me she hadn't had the chance to give yet. Maybe she'd forgotten it was there. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the more uneasy I felt. Something was off. Over the next few days, I became more and more paranoid. I didn't say anything to her about what I found. Instead, I tried to act normal, but I couldn't shake the suspicion. I started smoking again, something I hadn't done in years, since I was still boxing. It was the only way I could calm my nerves without exploding. One day at work, one of my colleagues, Tom, noticed something was bothering me. He asked if everything was okay. I gave him a half-hearted smile and tried to brush it off, but he pressed on. We'd been working together for years, and he could tell when something was eating me up inside. Eventually, I opened up and told him what I'd found. "Man, that doesn't sound right," Tom said, shaking his head. "I hate to say it, but it sounds like something's not clean there. Maybe you should look into it." His words hit me like a brick. I didn't want to believe it, But deep down, I knew he was right. I had to find out what was really going on. That's when I did something I never thought I'd do. I started spying on Amelia. At first, it was subtle. I'd casually ask her about her day, trying to catch any inconsistencies in her stories. I'd keep an eye on her phone when she wasn't looking, noticing how often she would quickly put it away when I was near. I started paying attention to her work schedule, questioning the extra shifts she was taking. I hated myself for doing it, but the jealousy and anger were consuming me. I still loved her, though. I kept telling myself that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong, that all of this was in my head. But the more I watched, the more suspicious things seemed. Then, one night, I found the first real clue. It was late, and Amelia had fallen asleep on the couch after another one of her long shifts. I was still wide awake, my mind buzzing with all the things I'd been noticing. I couldn't let it go. I hated myself for being so paranoid, but I had to know the truth. That night, I did something I had always sworn I would never do. I checked her computer. She had left it on the kitchen table, and the temptation was just too much. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I figured if something was really going on, I'd find a clue in her messages or emails. And then there it was, a message from someone named Nicole. At first, I thought it was just a friend. Amelia had mentioned a few women from work in passing, so I didn't think much of it. But what caught my attention was how quickly the message was deleted from her phone. The conversation was gone in an instant, but her email didn't sync as fast, and I managed to catch a glimpse of it. "Can't wait to see you again," it read. My heart sank. My hands were trembling as I scrolled through the rest of the emails. At first glance, everything seemed normal work-related messages, a few spam emails, but then, hidden deep in the archives, I found more from Nicole. Messages dated months, even years back. My gut twisted as I read through them, and it became clear that Amelia had been seeing her for a long time. They had been meeting secretly, planning getaways while I sat at home, completely in the dark. It wasn't just an affair. It was a full-blown relationship, something Amelia had been hiding from me for God knows how long. Worse, I realized that all those times I had been alone, when I thought she was at work or on a business trip, she had been with Nicole. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage crumbled in that moment. I had been betrayed, not by some random fling, but by the person I had trusted more than anyone in the world. I didn't confront her right away. I needed time to process the shock, to figure out what to do next. The anger in me was growing, though. I went back to boxing to deal with it, but this time, it wasn't for sport, it was to release the fury building up inside me. For a week after I discovered the emails, I kept everything to myself. I went through the motions of daily life like a robot, but inside, I was a mess. I felt like my world had been ripped apart, and yet, I couldn't bring myself to confront Amelia. I wasn't ready for what would come next. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew I couldn't just sit back and let her deceive me any longer. The betrayal had festered inside me like a poison. I had been pacing, smoking, punching at the gym every night to burn off the rage, but it wasn't enough. I needed answers. I needed to hear the truth from her own lips, no matter how much it would hurt. One evening, after she came home from work, I decided it was time. She walked into the house. Her usual routine, dropped her bag by the door, gave me a quick smile, and headed to the bedroom. But this time, I didn't let her escape. I followed her into the room and shut the door behind me. "Amelia," I said, my voice tight, "we need to talk." She looked up at me, a little surprised by the serious tone in my voice. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath, feeling my heart pound in my chest. "I know." Her face changed. It was subtle at first, but I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes, the way her body tensed up. "Know what?" she asked, trying to play it cool, but I could tell she was nervous. "About Nicole," I said, my voice cold and steady. "About everything." For a moment, she didn't say anything. Her mouth opened slightly as if she was searching for words, but nothing came out. Finally, she sat down on the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. The anger that had been boiling inside me for weeks finally spilled over. "Didn't mean for what to happen? To lie to me for years? To sneak around behind my back? You've been seeing her for how long, Amelia? How long have you been cheating on me? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel sympathy, not this time. It started before we got married, she confessed. I never wanted to hurt you. I cut her off. Hurt me? You've destroyed me, Amelia. You stood by me when I was at my lowest, pretended to care about me, and the whole time, you were seeing someone else. She didn't try to deny it. Instead, what she said next cut even deeper. I wasn't happy, Oscar, she said, her voice shaking. I love you, but not in the way you deserve. I married you because I thought it was the right thing to do, to make my parents happy, to fit this idea of the life I was supposed to have. But with Nicole, it's different. It always has been. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. So what? Our entire marriage was a lie. You were just pretending for the sake of appearances? She didn't respond right away, but the silence was enough of an answer. I was crushed, but more than that, I was furious. Furious at her for deceiving me. Furious at myself for not seeing it sooner. She had used me, built a life with me just to keep up a facade, while all the while, her heart was somewhere else. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, the weight of her betrayal finally sinking in. I'm done, I said, my voice ice cold. I'm leaving. As I walked out the door, her voice followed me. Oscar, please. But I didn't look back. Walking out of that house, leaving behind the woman I once thought I'd spend my life with, was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But the rage and betrayal burning inside me didn't let me grieve for long. I couldn't just let her get away with it. I wasn't going to be the fool who let someone walk all over him. Over the next few months, I planned. I wasn't interested in forgiving her or moving on quietly. I wanted Amelia to feel the weight of what she had done, and I wanted her to regret every moment she spent lying to me. Boxing had taught me one thing: to never back down from a fight. This wasn't going to be physical, but it was going to be brutal. The first thing I did was cut off all the money from our joint account. She had no idea until one day she went to pay for something, and her card was declined. I had taken everything, our savings, every penny we had put aside for the future. I transferred it all to a private account and left her with nothing but bills and debt. It was a small satisfaction, but it was just the start. Then, I began to make life difficult for her in ways she couldn't trace back to me. I'd cut the power to the house when I knew she'd be home late, mess with the plumbing, and even tamper with the locks so she'd have to spend nights out looking for a locksmith. Every little inconvenience I could think of, I made sure it happened. It was childish, sure, but every time she struggled, I felt a bit of the power that she had taken from me return. But that wasn't enough. I knew that Nicole was still in her life, and I decided to hit them both where it would hurt the most. I found a woman, someone who knew how to seduce people, someone who would have no problem pretending to be interested in Nicole. I paid her to get close to Nicole, to start a relationship with her. It took time, but eventually it worked. Nicole, the woman who had stolen my wife, fell for the act. One evening, I set up the final blow. I made sure Amelia would see Nicole and the woman I had hired together. I knew exactly when and where Nicole would be, and I tipped off Amelia just enough for her to find them. She walked right into it, seeing Nicole in the arms of someone else. Their fight was loud and vicious, right there in the middle of a crowded bar. I videotaped the entire thing from a distance and made sure Amelia's parents got a copy. That was the last straw for her. Amelia called me, crying, begging for forgiveness. She realized what she had lost, but it was too late. I had no intention of taking her back, no desire to hear her apologies. I hung up on her every time she tried to reach out. She finally understood what it felt like to be deceived, to have everything you thought was stable ripped away from you. In the end, I decided to move on, but not with another person. I couldn't trust anyone after what happened, and frankly, I didn't want to. I was done with relationships, with love, with all the lies that came with it. I sold the house, took the money I had left, and bought a small place for myself and my dog. He was my only companion now, the only one I could count on. As for Amelia, last I heard, she had moved back in with her parents, her life in pieces. She had lost everything: her marriage, her lover, even the respect of her family. I didn't feel sorry for her. Karma had finally caught up to her, and I had made sure of it. Months passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. My days were quiet, mostly filled with work at the airport and long walks with my dog. The chaos and anger that had consumed me during those first few months of revenge started to fade, replaced by a strange sense of peace. I had done what I set out to do. Amelia was no longer part of my life, and I had exacted the justice I thought I deserved. But after all the smoke cleared, I realized something. Revenge didn't bring me the closure I thought it would. Sure, it was satisfying in the moment seeing Amelia's world crumble, watching her deal with the pain she had caused me. But once it was all done, I still felt empty. The anger I had used to fuel my actions had left, but it hadn't healed the wounds. The betrayal still lingered, and trust felt like a concept I could no longer grasp. I avoided relationships entirely after that. I had no interest in falling into the same trap. Women came and went, but I kept my distance. I couldn't bring myself to let anyone close again, not after Amelia. My life became a simple routine of work, training at the gym, and spending time with my dog. He was loyal, dependable, everything a person couldn't be. Amelia, from what I'd heard through mutual friends, had spiraled. After the fallout with Nicole and the humiliation I had orchestrated with her parents, she had lost a lot of her social circles. Her parents, who had once held her in such high regard, were deeply disappointed in her, especially after they learned the truth about our marriage. She tried to rebuild, but it was never the same. The last thing I heard was that she moved to a smaller town, working at a local clinic. She had become a shadow of the woman I once knew, broken by the very lies she had crafted. And as for me, I slowly started to realize that maybe I was done with holding on to the past. The revenge, the betrayal, it was behind me now. I had survived the worst of it, and though I didn't know if I'd ever trust anyone again, I had come to terms with the fact that life moves on. You don't always get the happy ending you imagined, but that doesn't mean you can't find peace in other ways. I started spending more time outdoors, traveling again, this time alone. No grand trips to Paris or Berlin like Amelia and I used to do, but simpler places. National parks, quiet beaches, the kind of places where I could clear my head and feel free. Boxing remained a part of my life, not as a way to channel anger anymore, but as a discipline, a reminder that no matter what knocks you down, you get back up. In the end, Amelia and I had built a life on a lie, and it crumbled because of it. But that wasn't going to define me forever. I chose to rebuild my life on my terms this time, without the weight of betrayal, without the need for revenge, and without the expectation that anyone would be there to save me. It was just me now, and honestly, for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. Discover more stories. Subscribe today.